The War of 1812 marked the beginning of America's transition from an agrarian nation to an industrial power. The Age of Jackson is a period of change that encompasses not just the presidency of Andrew Jackson, but also the significant political, economic, and social developments that occurred prior to the Civil War. The prosperity of the time allowed Americans to reflect on social problems and to seek reforms that took hold on some regions more easily than in others. Jackson and his supporters shared a political philosophy later referred to as Jacksonian democracy. They sought a stronger presidency and executive branch and a weaker Congress. Out of respect for the common man, they also sought to broaden public participation in government. So, they expanded voting rights to include all adult white males, not just landowners. The implementation of universal male suffrage by state legislatures dramatically increased the number of voters in the United States. Jacksonian democracy also favored limiting the power of the federal government in favor of expanding state power. This issue of states' rights was a very divisive issue during the early 19th century. The idea of states' rights centered upon who held the supreme power of government, states or the federal government. The root of the argument became fixed in the constitutional debates between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists during the ratification process. The issue of whether states could nullify federal law nearly split the United States. Southerners believed that some tariffs were purposely passed to hurt Southern plantation owners in order to benefit Northern industrialists. In response, South Carolina legislators nullified the tariff. Jackson believed that federal law preempted state law, and the ensuing nullification crisis made clear how divided the nation was becoming. The nullification crisis had a profound effect on North-South relations. Southerners continued vocally to support the issue of states' rights and began to build a coalition that would not back down from the threat of force in the future. Slave owners began to wonder what would happen if the federal government decided to end slavery by law. Andrew Jackson's democratic philosophy and appeal to the common man did not extend to American Indians. During his military career, Jackson was known for his attacks on the Seminole and Creek tribes in the southern United States and northern Florida. Once Jackson was elected president, he worked to expand the land available for white settlement. To achieve this, Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in 1830, which forced thousands of American Indians to leave their homelands and resettle west of the Mississippi River. The American Indians would be given land in the west in exchange for the lands they'd held in the east. While most tribes resented the policy, they reluctantly complied. However, a few tribes, such as the Cherokee Nation in Georgia, refused to give up their land to the state. Over the next few years, the Cherokee were forced to travel to the west over what became known as the Trail of Tears. The forced removal was difficult, and thousands of American Indians died along the way due to starvation, disease, and exhaustion. Industrialization expanded in the United States following the War of 1812 and gained momentum in the 1830s. The emphasis on building American manufacturers was one of the points of conflict between the Whig Party, led by Henry Clay, and the Jacksonian Democrats. Clay and the Whigs believed very strongly that the federal government should be involved in funding progress through infrastructure projects and investing in the development of industry. As industrialization expanded, each region of the United States was affected. With improved transportation methods rapidly changing the United States, Henry Clay became more involved in promoting the nation's economic growth. Clay was a Kentucky politician, founder of the Whig Party, and rival of Andrew Jackson. He supported industrialization and believed that the federal government needed to take strong action to ensure the economic growth of the United States. The American system was Henry Clay's plan for expanding production in the United States. There were three components to the American system: protective tariffs, federal funding for roads, canals, and railroads, and re-establishing a national bank and currency to stabilize the economy. The North, South, and West became more closely linked together through advances in transportation and the industrial process. In the 1820s, a second Great Awakening spread across the United States. The Jacksonian democracy's emphasis on the common man bolstered the religious revival that swept the nation. Revivalist ministers preached sermons that appealed to all classes and spread a message of salvation for all. One of the effects of the Second Great Awakening was a desire by Christians to attack perceived social ills in 19th century America that stemmed from the poor conditions created by urbanization and industrialization. Temperance, public education, and women's efforts to gain suffrage were all areas of reform that emerged from the religious focus of the period. The issue of slavery has been present in American politics since the nation's inception. Slavery was an issue when Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence. The delegates to the Constitutional Convention created a series of compromises addressing slavery to placate Southerners at Philadelphia. Jefferson and Washington spoke out against slavery and freed their own slaves upon death. Both historical figures have been scrutinized for the contradiction of owning slaves while speaking out against the practice. Slavery was prohibited in the Northwest Territories by federal law, so that slaveholding was confined to those states south of the Mason-Dixon line. Prior to the cotton gin, slavery was nearly dead in the South. The invention of the gin revived slavery and spurred westward expansion. Politicians in the first third of the 1800s sought to maintain a perfect equilibrium on the issue of slavery in several ways: by maintaining an equal number of slave and free states, by passing a gag rule which prevented the discussion of slavery in the House of Representatives, and by working out compromises on the issue in the 1850s. Abolition movements had also existed in America since the colonial period, when the Quakers led the effort to end slavery. Their efforts waned after the American Revolution, but were renewed in the 1830s as part of the Second Great Awakening reform movements. Three groups of abolitionists emerged during this period. One group, the American Colonization Society of 1818, called for the emancipation and transportation of freed slaves back to Africa to be settled in the new colony of Liberia. The second group, the American Anti-Slavery Society of 1833, was led by William Lloyd Garrison and called for immediate emancipation by any means necessary. A moderate group called the Liberty Party pledged to end slavery through legal and political means. Some of the most notable abolitionists were William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, and the Grimke sisters. Slave rebellions also began to occur and caused slave owners to implement even harsher restrictions on slaves. The black preacher Nat Turner believed his mission on earth was to free his people from slavery. Turner led a slave rebellion in Virginia before he and his followers were captured, tried, and executed. Fear and anger over the murder of primarily white women and children led to many innocent blacks becoming victims of mob violence. Virginia, a state that had been considering a ban on slavery, instead passed a series of laws to strengthen the institution of slavery. Other southern states quickly passed laws that emulated Virginia's revised slave codes to enforce stricter control.